Hey everybody, welcome back. I am your host, Sirprize, with you as always to bring the fun and amazing new content. Today we're going to talk about the top 5 of my 20 favorite MCU movies. And without further ado, let's get right to it. Coming in at number 5 is Avengers Endgame. This was the culmination of the Infinity Saga. So many things to talk about in this movie. First of all, I love how they started off with Tony and Nebula trying to make it back, running out of fuel, being stuck in space, and Captain Marvel saving them. That was really cool. It was a really neat way to introduce Captain Marvel to the storyline. It seemed pretty dire for our heroes, and I just love the way that they did this. Now, of course, after they get back is when we get to see Cap and Tony get into it and kind of finish up the conversation that they really didn't get to finish after Civil War about how Cap said that they would lose together and Tony was mad at him, but really he was just mad that they failed because of everything that happened. And this was just such an important scene, one that we'd been waiting to happen for years. So they come up with a plan to go get Thanos. They go up there. I mean, they defeat him, but what did they really defeat? He'd already won. He'd already decided that he is retired and didn't have anything to fight for. Thor went for the head. Now, the most fun part about all of this was getting to see it in the theater. The audience reactions were out of this world on opening night. Between all the laughs and all of the gasps, and then just the words appearing on the screen 5 years later, even that got reactions out of the audience. It was amazing to see this with all of these fans that have been doing the same thing we have for the last 10, 11 years, falling in love with these characters and seeing how this all played out. I enjoyed the Namor tease. I'm assuming that was a Namor tease that Okoye was talking about when she talked about the earthquake under the ocean. It had to be a Namor tease. Plus, who knows what was going on the last 5 years. Wakanda was being run by I don't know who. I've speculated before that I think it would be interesting if they had M'Baku running Wakanda with T'Challa gone. I mean, it's 5 years. They can't just sit around and do nothing and wait. Regardless of how we want to see the world, it has to move on. And I think that it would be a really interesting story to explore what they did during those years without Shuri or T'Challa there. I think M'Baku would have done a good job. I think that after the understanding he came to with T'Challa and everything that happened with the first Black Panther movie, I think that it would have been really interesting dynamic to see, but I think he would have done a good job. I also think that Black Panther 2 needs to start with, however, T'Challa's, is he going to just be given the kingdom back, or is he going to have a power struggle with M'Baku while all this is going on? Is that when Namor strikes? I really think that just that one little Easter egg was a really interesting way to set up what might happen in Black Panther 2. The reveal of Professor Hulk was really neat. That was fun to see how they were going to deal with Bruce Banner and the Hulk fighting for one body. I'm not sure how I feel about what they did with it, but I think that they were probably out of things to do with just the Hulk smash character and with Bruce Banner just being Banner. Now, he put on the Hulk Buster suit, but where was this going to go? How is this going to end? So I think that was really interesting. I also got a kick out of the giant plates of food that were sitting in front of him. That was kind of funny and interesting and just a really neat take on the whole situation. I'm not really sure what was going on with the Ronin storyline, what they intended on doing with that. I understand that Clint kind of went off the rails after his family died. Lord knows what any of us would do once our entire family gets snapped out of existence like that. I mean, your wife, every one of your kids that you love very much, that had to be a lot to him. And I don't have a problem with them having him be Ronin. I just don't really understand what that had to do with anything. Once Natasha shows up, he's just okay again and goes back to being Clint, maybe a little bit angrier, but they don't really explore the consequences of any of that. It just goes away like it didn't even happen. It was a little bit weird to me. Also, we get to finally see Tony and Steve make up. That was a very important scene, a very emotional scene, a pretty funny scene too. And I love how they just accepted everything that had happened, moved forward, and focused on the task at hand. It was very Avengers-y, I really like how they did it. Now, I do think that the first half of the movie took just a little bit too long. That's actually why this falls all the way to number 5. If it hadn't taken so long to do the things that they were trying to get accomplished, it might not have been number 5. It might have been higher, and I'm not even sure what they could have cut out to make it shorter, but I think that they probably edited as much as they possibly could out. This was a 3-hour movie. It felt very much 3 hours. Watching it the first time, it wasn't so bad, but rewatching it is when the first half of the movie starts to take too long. And I think that that's what holds this movie back from being able to be ranked higher. I do think that the plan to get all of the stones that they came up with was a really fun way to revisit the old movies, especially the first Avengers movie. I like that they spent a little bit of time in Thor: The Dark World when that's universally considered the weakest of the MCU movies, so that was pretty cool. Got to spend a little bit of time with Rene Russo's character again, which was probably one of the saddest deaths in the entire MCU. The unsnap is what I like to call it, when Hulk snaps and brings everybody back. I like that this revisits the conversation in the Avengers where they talk about the Hulk must have saved Banner's life for some reason. What's his purpose? Tony says, I guess we'll find out. And here we are. Hulk's the only one strong enough to put the gauntlet on. Now, maybe Thor could have handled it had he not had his PTSD or any of those things, but the way that the movie was written, Hulk was the only one that could do it, and I really enjoyed that scene. And then we get to the final battle. That was by far the most amazing moment in comic book movie history. From the 3 of them fighting him, losing one by one, Cap picking up the hammer. It teased it in Age of Ultron, and he picks up Mjolnir and is able to call the lightning. That was such a great scene. But then on your left, and the portals start opening, and what a scene. It got people crying, it got people cheering, it got people excited. It was beautiful. It was amazing. Just all you have to see is the portal scene. Even to this day, I can see the portal scene and start tearing up. It's so exciting and so great. And then at the climax of the music gets up there and everybody starts lining up, and the line we've been waiting for all this time, especially since they teased it in Age of Ultron. He says it, and I don't know if everybody went as crazy as I did when they finally got to hear Cap say, Avengers, assemble. I screamed out loud in the theater. It was such a big, exciting, happy moment. And of course, we all know how the movie ended. Tony Stark, Iron Man, killing Thanos, being the one to lay down on the wire and prove Steve wrong after all this time. Steve getting to go back and return all the stones, which is, we can talk about how that did or didn't make sense. We can talk about how that may or may not have worked the way that how's he going to get the Soul Stone back to Vormir? This, that, or the other. But we're not focusing on that. We're just focusing on how great the movie was and how he finally got to go back and get his dance with Peggy and end the movie that way. What an end to the Infinity War saga. What an amazing ride and well-told story by everyone from the beginning of the MCU 10, 11 years ago. Maybe they had this plan in mind all that time. Maybe it just ended up rolling like a snowball and unfolding the way that it did, and they started getting ideas along the way, but this was definitely planned from early on. You can tell maybe they made some changes, some adjustments along the way, but by the end of the series, this was exactly where it was going to end up, and it couldn't have been done much better, if at all. Number 5, Avengers Endgame. I think I'm finally done talking about it. Let's move on. At number 4, we have The Avengers. Now, this movie, this was a first. We'd had ensemble movies as far as the X-Men, but they all came in together in X-Men 1. And then, yes, the roster grew as we went. We had X-Men 2, which had a few more characters. But this was the first time that we had a comic book character in a movie, and then another one in another movie, and then another one in another movie, and a fourth one in a fourth movie, and then brought all of those franchises together the way that they did. And yes, Black Widow was in Iron Man 2, and Hawkeye was briefly in Thor, but We'd never seen this happen before, and nobody knew how it was going to work out. Most people were pretty excited for the Avengers, especially after Captain America came out. That's when this franchise really started gaining traction. The first Iron Man, of course, it was good. The second one was good. Hulk was pretty good. The first Thor, for the time, was, it was the only Thor movie we had. We didn't have anything to compare it against, so it wasn't bad, especially for the time, but we'd never seen anything like this before. I love the opening scene of this movie. I really think that they did that really well. Loki looks insane when he comes through the portal. And then Black Widow's opening scene in this is absolutely legendary. It might even be better than her coming out scene in Iron Man 2. Mark Ruffalo taking over for Edward Norton was seamless and smooth, and it's almost as if he was always the one that was meant for the role. I actually really enjoyed his take on it way more than Edward Norton's. Obviously, I'm pretty sure everybody is in agreement that Mark Ruffalo has done a better job as Bruce Banner than Edward Norton did. But at the time, it was a big risk. It was their second major recast. Don Cheadle taking over for Terrence Howard being the first one, and then this one was probably a much bigger deal, at least as far as the main set of Avengers go, because War Machine wasn't in the first Avengers movie, which even then I thought was a letdown. One thing I still don't understand, though, is why Thanos had the Mind Stone in that staff and gave it to Loki. Still makes no sense to me. As I spoke about before with Endgame, I think it's cool how even way back in 2012, the thread for future movies was already being placed, talking about how the big guys saved my life for what? Apparently to undo the snap. I really miss Coulson being in the MCU. I know he's on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and that is a fantastic show. By the way, if you don't watch it, you should. Even though some parts of it are slow, just like with the rest of Marvel, this is a chance to get to know characters and fall in love with them. But one of the main reasons we miss Coulson so much is Coulson was the only thing that all of them had in common. He was in every movie except for the Hulk. And obviously he wasn't in Captain America, the First Avenger, because that took place in the 40s. So he got to know Cap and Banner in this movie, but not nearly as much. But even still, Coulson was the one thread that tied them together. So him dying in this one made a lot more sense than Quicksilver dying in Age of Ultron. This was a impactful death. Joss Whedon says that he likes to have a death to show the stakes of what they're up against. This one did that. This one, they lost part of their team. They lost an Avenger. Like they discussed in S.H.I.E.L.D., the formula that brought him back was made so that they could bring back a fallen Avenger. Well, Coulson was an Avenger. Speaking of Coulson dying, in the scene that he's killed in, he's laying next to a sign that says 325. I just thought that was really interesting because in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it's revealed that he is brought back to life with GH 325. Going back a little bit, I thought it was cool that Stark runs a virus, which is a tech investigation into Phase 2. Captain America does it his way, which is the old school way. He discovers it in person, but both of them, using their own methods, actually discover Phase 2. I like how the Mind Stone fuels the paranoia and the intensity of the situation. They didn't use Dutch angles until they got to that part of the movie. I think that that's why Banner grabs his staff. It's calling to them, inciting them. If you notice, Stark even starts rubbing his head as he realizes something isn't right while they argue, just after he and Captain America were really just getting after it with each other. I just love that scene. And during that scene, does Tony ask Cap if he's a threat just above Angry Bees? This is a fantastic movie. Nobody can deny the iconic long shot of all six of them. And then, of course, that's actually one of my favorites, though. Everybody loves the circle shot for good reason, but I think that my favorite shot of the whole movie is that long shot, the one where it starts with, I believe it starts with Cap and Natasha on the ground, and then it just, at one point or another, it shows every single one of them. I love that. And one final thought, this felt like a comic book brought to life. It didn't feel like a comic book movie. It felt like a comic book. This was absolutely deserving of the number 4 slot, and I love it. Number 3, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. First thing I want to bring up is the Russo brothers' attention to detail is amazing. At the beginning of the movie, when Natasha shoots the window before Cap jumps them through it, is just an example of their amazing attention to detail. It's very cryptic and maybe even telling that Peggy says during the interview that Steve is watching that Cap saved the man that eventually became her husband. All I know is Endgame makes it feel like he was always her husband, and I just think it's a really interesting dynamic, the way that was told without her saying who her husband was, without them showing who he was. They never talk about who Peggy's husband was, and the whole time her husband was Steve. I think that this is one of the first movies that the score and the soundtrack are very noticeable, especially the Winter Soldier song. And if you notice, Jasper Sitwell and Rumlow were both there when they pronounced Fury dead, which is one of the reasons why Fury needed to be pronounced dead. The paranoia in this movie is so intense. It's often reflected in the score. The scale of the turn is multiplied by watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., by the way. Again, I'm mentioning this show, but watching them simultaneously is rewarded. If you haven't seen Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., watch it, and when you get to, I think it's episode 18, it's called Turn, Turn, Turn. Watch that and The Winter Soldier at the same time. Not at the same time, but I mean on the same day, and it's just that much more intense, everything that happens. I think that the impact of Fury dying and the Hydra infiltration is one of the dominoes that leads to Civil War, Infinity War, and everything that happens afterwards. Just another example of storytelling at its finest. While they're in the base, right before they find Zola, Natasha is looking at the pictures and asks who the woman is. She's a top S.H.I.E.L.D. operative and doesn't know who Peggy Carter is. I thought that was really weird. So basically, the minute that they found Zola, Hydra started coming out of the shadows. It may have been then, it may have been when Cap makes the announcement towards the end of the movie, but it's right around, it's all happening right around then. It all happens all at once, too. It's why it was so overwhelming. Had it not been for a few, they would have taken over completely, thoroughly, and swiftly. Another thing I noticed watching this movie was, from the get-go, from the jump, nobody has been more loyal to Steve than Sam. I don't think that that's noticed near as much, but it should be. And I think that that's why Sam ends up getting the shield at the end of Endgame. Because nobody has been by his side from the get-go, except for him. Not like him, anyway. I think that one of the main things about this movie that gets lost a little bit is friendship. These movies, all of them have some kind of, well, I say all of the movies, but definitely the ones done by the Russos, they all have a common theme, and I think that the theme of this one is definitely friendship. This was a very solid movie from beginning to end. If you haven't seen The Winter Soldier, you definitely need to. If you've seen it and it was a long time ago, you definitely need to rewatch it. This was an amazing movie from the minute it started until the minute it stopped. And this definitely had lasting impact on the rest of the MCU. Number 2, Captain America: Civil War. Every single time that they show Bucky killing the Starks from the beginning of the movie until the end, it's from a different perspective. And every single time they show just a little bit more. Steve loses people in Lagos. Rumlow mentions Bucky just before detonating a bomb. The Accords slap them in the face. He loses Peggy. Bucky comes back into his life, all in the span of a few days. Granted, we don't know the exact time frame, but funerals generally take place within a week of passing. Ross tells them that the UN meets in 3 days to ratify the Accords. The building is bombed that day, and Ross gives Tony 36 hours to bring Cap and Bucky in. So in reality, we can assume all of this takes place in about a week. That's a lot of emotion for 1 week. I'm not trying to make excuses, but it does make sense that Captain America doesn't make the best decisions during this time. Not to mention, Sharon says during the funeral, in the middle of all this, not to compromise. Advice given to her by Peggy herself. So, yet again, a very emotional response. Steve's emotions are high. He's given advice from the woman that he loves that just died while his emotions are high, not to compromise. A moment ago, I said that the theme of Winter Soldier was friendship. I really think that the theme of Civil War was emotion, making decisions while emotional. Later in the movie, Tony makes decisions based on emotion. When he sees that Bucky is the one that killed his parents, he even says, "I don't care, he killed my mom." Again, this was an emotional response. This was a direct response to a very emotional moment. And if he'd even been given a week to stop and think, it wouldn't have happened like that. But all of this, for the way that Black Panther went after Bucky, even the plan that Zemo came up with, all of these things were based around emotion and making decisions around emotion. And when you're emotional, you don't make the best decisions. Some people are able to, but for the most part, you don't make the best decisions when you're emotional like that. And that was a recurring theme throughout this movie. By the way, that motorcycle grab that Bucky pulled off was one of the coolest stunts of all time. All of the action scenes are so well done and intense. And again, with this movie, the soundtrack and the score are phenomenal. We also can't talk about this movie without talking about Steve Rogers, or should I say Chris Evans' workout routine. That, for lack of a better term, they even called it bicep porn. I mean, dude's almost 40 years old and his biceps are bigger than my head. I like that the multiple Winter Soldier misdirect is not only used against the heroes, but it's also used against us. That was one of the many examples of the Russo brothers' amazing filmmaking. Over and over again, they keep showing that they were the right choice to take over with the Winter Soldier, and then Civil War, and then the next two Avengers movies. Baron Zemo is one of the best all-time antagonists. I'm really excited to see him again in Falcon and Winter Soldier. Speaking of the multiple Winter Soldiers, I actually love it that the stunt performers got a chance to be in the movie as characters. Even though they didn't have any lines or really anything else, they actually got to be characters in the movie, and I thought that was really cool. At the time of this movie, this was the most heroes assembled on screen from the most different franchises. And even though Spider-Man and Black Panther hadn't come out yet, you had the Avengers, plus you had Ant-Man, Black Panther, Spider-Man. We had never seen anything like that before. The closest thing was the first Avenger. That's why a lot of people call this Avengers 2.5, because this was kind of the third Avengers movie, even though it was technically a Captain America movie. Also, speaking of Spider-Man, that intro of his was epic. This was a great intro for him. I loved the awkward interactions, the chatty, nervous banter. This, to me, is what Spider-Man was supposed to be like. Not the cocky guy from Amazing Spider-Man. And even though Tobey Maguire's version was better than the Amazing Spider-Man version, I still think that this version from Civil War was the best Spider-Man we've ever had. And maybe it wasn't exactly the same in his solo movies or Infinity War or Endgame or anything like that, but this movie right here was the best Spider-Man we ever got, and I'm so glad we got to get it. I like that the airport battle starts mostly friendly and then gets a little bit more serious once War Machine and Iron Man get mad. Also, where does Vision disappear to once they start fighting after lining up? You see them, the 6 on the Iron Man side line up, you see the 6 on the Captain America side line up, and then Vision just disappears until he flies through Ant-Man when he becomes Giant Man towards the end of the fight. Where in the world did he go? I mean, even Wanda was doing a few things. And I know that characters came and went and the way it was directed. I get how movies are made, but I didn't understand where Vision just completely disappeared to. I thought maybe for a moment he might have been guarding the airplane, but he wasn't, because he wasn't anywhere near it when he flew through Giant Man to stop Steve and Bucky from getting to it. So, I don't know, I thought that was a little bit weird. I think the only thing I don't like about this movie is that Spider-Man says "holy shit" whenever he sees Scott grow into Giant Man. I do love that Clint introducing himself to T'Challa comes back in Endgame. I know that many things come back in that movie, but that's actually one of my favorites. It's subtle. You barely notice it unless you just flat out notice it, but I do love that they included that. Oh, also, this just may be one of the absolute best Stan Lee cameos ever to end this movie. Number 1. The number 1 movie on this list. The number 1 comic book movie of all time. And in fact, quite possibly, my new favorite movie of all time, regardless of genre. Avengers Infinity War. So what makes Infinity War so amazing to me? I could probably talk about this movie for 20 minutes just by itself. It starts off letting the stakes be known right away. They bring in our gladiator, the Hulk, to fight Thanos and show us just how much we have no chance against him. Hulk not only loses, but as he's thrown to the ground, we hear the cliched dun 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 from the score. He kills Loki. He destroys Xandar. And all of this is either before the movie even starts or right as the movie starts. The scene where they send Hulk and or Banner to Earth and he crashes through the Sanctum Sanctorum. The scene where Bruce tells Tony what they're up against. And then one of my favorite scenes of all time is when they walk out of the Sanctum and they're walking down the street and everything is going crazy right before they encounter Cull Obsidian and Ebony Maw. That's such an amazing scene to me. I don't know that it's really been stated just how great a scene just that one scene is. So good. I think that the only thing that you could really gripe about when it comes to this movie is the fact that you never actually get to see all of the Avengers, all of the heroes, every single one of them on the screen at the same time, which is part of what makes the payoff at the end of Endgame so good. If they would have all been on the screen at the same time in Infinity War, it may not have been as good at the end of Endgame. I'll admit that I thought the storyline of Wanda and Vision falling in love was a little silly at first. I wasn't really into it. I thought it was kind of strange, and I don't know, I wasn't invested in that story. And by the end of that movie, I think that the story with Wanda absolutely breaks my heart. Every time I watch it, and every time I see what Wanda has to go through, she has to be the one not only to kill Vision, the love of her life, but then she has to watch Thanos resurrect him and pluck the stone out of his head. Her lip tremble was so perfect. She played that so well. And Paul Bettany, too, played that very, very well. Especially the line, "I only feel you." Paying that off at the end of the movie when he says that at the beginning. So perfect. As I said, I could go on and on about how much I love this movie, and there's so many things to say about how good it was. I've always wanted a movie where the bad guy wins. And oh boy, did Thanos win. I wondered if they were going to be able to pay the comic book proper respect and do it justice, and boy, did they ever deliver on that too. Now, I didn't really read any of the other Infinity Sagas. All I really got into was the first one. But that one started with the Thanos snap. This one, okay, technically Infinity War ended with the snap, but then we had to deal with 2.5 movies of the... Well, I guess Captain Marvel didn't really show the after effects until the post-credit scenes, and even Ant-Man and the Wasp didn't show the effects until the post-credit scenes, but we all knew. We all knew we were going into those movies without any resolution to what had happened. We knew that we were going to have to wait for the next Avengers movie for anything to get resolved from it. They killed some of... It was no accident who they erased in the snap. No accident whatsoever. Black Panther, Spider-Man, some of the most beloved characters in all of the MCU were wiped out of existence, and they tore our hearts out of our chests over and over again until the final shot of the movie. There was a lot of good humor in the movie too, by the way. For them to be able to put so much good humor in such a sad and scary and amazing movie, the emotions of this movie were all over the place, but I do think that they did an amazing job of injecting some actual real humor in the movie. The scene with Thor coming into the Battle of Wakanda and the Avengers theme song playing just perfectly with him arriving. I actually almost wish that they hadn't let Banner say "Y'all are so screwed now," because aside from that one blip, that was one of the most amazing scenes in all of movie history. Thor rising into the air and the way that the lightning came into him and him striking the ground. Now, that actually does bring up something that bothers me about Thor. Why is it that when Thor uses his lightning against nobodies, let's say the Chitauri or, the Outriders or anybody like that, no-name villains or whatever you want to call them, he uses lightning against them, it splits them in pieces and destroys them. But when he uses lightning against anyone else, it just hits them and knocks them down and hurts. I don't really like that. That's a little silly. I wish they'd at least stay consistent with that. Again, I'm getting so nitpicky, it's not even funny. And I'm not nitpicking this movie. For me to put this at number one, for me to say that this is possibly my favorite movie of all time, I can't do anything but nitpick. That's the best case scenario for anything negative to be said. I think this movie is a masterpiece in every way to me. And it's going to be impossible for any movie to ever top it, at least in the comic book genre. It may come close. Them bringing the X-Men into the universe is going to be pretty epic to me because they're my favorites. And they may even find a way to top it somehow in the future with an X-Men storyline because of how much I love them. But as of right now, I don't know how they're possibly going to. I don't think the Russos are doing any more movies. I've said time and again how great a job they did with the movies that they did. Look at my top 5. 4 out of the 5 movies were done by the Russo brothers. In fact, the 4 movies that the Russo brothers did are 4 of the top 5 movies in my top 20 countdown. So that's our list. Thanks for joining me, and I hope that you agree. Don't forget to subscribe, comment below if you have anything to say. Tell me how I'm wrong. Tell me how I'm right. Tell me if you agree. Tell me your favorite scene. Tell me your favorite movie. I want to hear from you. I want to hear what you have to say about it because that's the beauty of all these movies. We don't have to agree. We can agree about some parts of it. We can disagree about some parts of it. But these movies are so much fun. These are such good movies. And I just want to know what you think. Tell me below. Thanks for hanging out. And until next time.
Have a good one.